environment for that plant. And if it doesn't find that anywhere else, so that's why you often find what we call endemic plants that are limited to an area, that they're not found elsewhere. And there's a high level of endemism in the Cape. So, too much development has a big impact on these rare plant species. This is a nice example of pristine fynbos. It's an area that hasn't been burned for quite a long while. But then on the other side, there's a recent fire that happened down on the other edge there. You can see the white edge over there. That was quite a devastating fire. Destroyed all the vegetation in this area. Just a few of these protea trees that are still barely surviving. Quite amazing that you...
Well, they survive.
Surviving, actually, you see it got scorched, but you see the new growth over there. It's still empires that actually rise and then something causes them to crash. Be it war, be it environmental factors, disease, quite a few things. But life has this thing. It has this renewable energy. It comes from somewhere, and the problem is that us humans build this kind of, get ourselves to this apex point where we are in control of our world, in control of everything, and it's actually a very fragile position to be in, because there's the cycle where nature has this way of building and destroying, and our civilizations are also as vulnerable as a situation like this. So
we might just be being part of nature now, what we do.
Well, the earth has this, and I mean the greatest cities in the world are just as vulnerable. I mean the foundations might be good, and the construction might be great, but it doesn't take much. It can take an earthquake, it can take a flood, or just a fire, or even man himself, to destroy all of that. So we kind of invest too much of our lives in building things of materialistic value, and we attach too much connection to that. It's important to find a balance in life where you know that you are satisfying your absolute needs and not having to be consumptive, and actually build these kind of these towers of grandeur and put too much attention on that value artificial system, because it's fragile. As fragile as it can. I'll go into the detail of the plants later, but this is a situation where we have a dramatic coastline, with these mountains and seascape, and a little bay like False Bay is also once again a very fragile system. It's an incredible biodiversity of animals that exist in extreme conditions. During the summer months we have winds that blow into this bay here, bringing in warm water, and over the winter months the wind blows in the opposite direction and blows all the warm water out of the bay, and we get pockets of what we call upwelling, where the surface water is blown away and then the deep nutrient rich water comes up from below and replenishes that displaced water, and that brings with it the foundation of life for the ocean, which is all these organisms that have been dormant on the ocean floor, and as they get brought to the surface, where you have this, you see the rings of white along the edge of all this. The coastline is that you're seeing there is actually a plankton bloom. That those organisms are brought into the oxygen-rich water, and they suddenly burst into life, and that's the pyramid of the lower part of the pyramid of life that supports this incredible fish reserve and marine biodiversity. So that would what we refer to as the plant version, the phytoplankton, the plant plankton. And then as that food drifts out into this area here, which is mainly the coastline is really made up of pretty cool water. The average temperature is about 12 degrees, so it ranges from really, really cold sometimes to even below 10 degrees, and then it can rise up to about 20 degrees depending on the wind. But this area supports an incredible pelagic reserve of fish, and this plant plankton then eventually gets fed on by the zooplankton, which are the jellyfish and the floating component of plankton, and a bit of krill and all that. And then the other group of fish which live off that, mainly filter feeding fish and anchovies and sardines and mackerel and all that, are then the next level. Great schools and concentrations of that exist off the Cape. Very, very fragile, what they call bait fish reserves. And that would then support the incredible game fish that seasonally exist off the coast here. So the problem is that it's all good and well that nature's supporting itself in a great balance until somebody comes along with a huge net and just trawls that entire pelagic shoal away. And the Cape is very vulnerable in that way. It's quite accessible to fishing vessels. I mean, there's good harbours and good technology, and very soon a fleet of trawlers could discover a shoal of fish. They use all sorts of methods of locating them these days. They use satellite technology. They're able to use they've got various sonars that aren't just that don't just scan the ocean floor below the boat. They're able to use horizontal sonars where they're actually able to extend the range of the sonars way beyond the old traditional methods, so they can locate shoals of fish from far away and very strategically bring in a whole team of trawlers and actually take everything. So it is a big issue for us. It is one of the richest fishing grounds in the world. In terms of biodiversity, the South African coastline, which is 3,000 kilometers long, represents the second largest diversity of families of fish in the world. So from the very warm tropical coastline up on the border of Mozambique, all the way to the really cold and rugged coastline of the border of Namibia. So it's a huge range, and within that range, you've got the pelagic fish, which are the ones that very much occur off this coastline, which live in the cold water, which is the Benguela current. And then on the east coast, we've got fish that are reef fish. So they're a bit more vulnerable in terms of exploitation, because they don't easily regenerate themselves. Because once a reef has been destroyed, it's very hard to kind of build the viability of that reef back again. But a place like False Bay, as I said, it's a place where we've got enormous number of fish that are able to withstand that range of temperatures, that are also very localized, as it's some of the fish up on the tropical areas. And within this bay, we've got quite a number of fish that are endemic only to this area, mainly amongst what we refer to them as the little sand sharks, the smaller reef sharks. False Bay is unfortunately quite protected. They don't allow any trawling in the bay here, and the type of fishermen that operate in the area are mainly the traditional fishermen from Cork Bay, who are line fishermen, and a couple of sports anglers. But there are still, in the bay, there are a number of areas which are regarded as breeding sites for cob and for steenbras, and those areas are unfortunately still permit dragnet fishing. So quite often fish that come in to spawn and breed happen to fall within the range of these gill net or land-based net fishermen, and they actually trawl the whole group in and destroy that viable breeding population. But yeah, so False Bay is a spectacular area. Good part of it is fortunately protected, and this time of the year we have an incredible gathering of whales, mainly southern right whales, that congregate in these waters.
Impact of on the ground, on the bottom floor of the trawlers.
Well, trawlers don't really operate here, but on the other side of this reserve is an area which we refer to as the canyon area, where the water is particularly deeper than here. And it's kind of the kind of interface where you have the cold water and the warm water mixing, because although we have this cold Benguela current pushing up coming down the coast, pushing up the coast from the subantarctic, we have a countercurrent that comes from the other side, and that countercurrent is usually warm water, and that's where all the predatory fish live. And then you have the bait fish within the colder water. Now that's an area that the trawlers target, because it supports quite a biodiversity of fish, mainly the hake and kingklip. The problem with the trawler is non-specific. They basically create this huge wall of net, and they just trawl everything within range of that. And it takes everything. There's a huge amount of bycatch. It doesn't quite scrape. Bycatch is non-target fish. It could be fish. It could be mammals. It could be dolphins. It could be anything that happens to be in the path of that net is taken. And those nets trawl for 3 hours. And once they pull it out, everything, the contents of that net gets dropped into a hold, and then it gets processed. So in the time of being trawled for 3 hours and then being thrown out of the water into this big cargo hold and then being processed, most of the animals don't survive. So what would happen then is the fishing company would just take out the viable fish, and the rest would just be thrown out the back. There are quite a few other techniques of fishing beyond, other than the trawling, is the long lining. And the long lining is a matter of having a long rope with multiple lines with hooks, which are baited, and it's also quite non-target, because they might be looking to catch what they call the normal lionfish by baiting for kingklip and for hake, but they catch quite a number of sharks in the process as well. And those fish don't survive. The other problem with that is the number of seabirds that are actually attracted to this fishing operation. So you've got albatrosses, and you've got shearwaters, and all the incredible flocks of pelagic birds out there that actually follow these fishing vessels. And quite a few of them get dive as the ropes are recovered. The long liners, with each rope with its whole series of hooks, and the quite often albatrosses that actually get impaled on the hooks and brought out. So we lose a lot of albatrosses in the process of that. So talking about bycatch, these animals all suffer as a consequence of this too. So do the birds. So that's true, but the thing is that there's just so much they can eat, and the rest is just pure wastage. It's just a loss of unnecessary life. Man is polluting quite a few of these coastal areas with the sewage situations, and quite a few of the rivers in Cape Town that have been previously quite polluted have also had quite an effect on the estuaries and the coastline. But I think the bigger problem in the rock lobster industry is that they're using a very, very the method of catching lobsters utilizes what they call a trap, which is a huge basket-like box, which has got two funnels on either side. And the problem is that these fishermen often put these traps out on very, very bad weather days, because they're forced by, they have a pressure to catch a certain number of quota within a certain time frame. So they do expose themselves to some extreme conditions, and in the process lose these nets. And once this net is lost, it continues for almost infinity until that net actually disintegrates, continually catching everything through that funnel system. So they might have started out and had a trap full of crayfish, but those crayfish rot and attract other crayfish. So there's more destruction by them losing one of those nets than probably by them just fulfilling their quota. And if you go onto the western side of the peninsula, you'll just see beaches littered with those traps. I mean, I count up to about 30, 40 at the moment in the reserve. And just try and think back of when they might have lost that, and what a process of killing that net has gone through until it eventually found its way onto the beach. They should prevent operators from using those. They should be.
Man is impacting the planet everywhere, and one of the big problems that is happening is potentially with global warming. They're anticipating a man-made, man-induced heating of the planet, and thus rising the sea levels because of the melting ice. What impact would that have, in your opinion, on, I mean, can you sort of foresee how it might unwind at the process? Up goes the sea level, let's say, give it 2 meters. How will that change things for anybody, for anything?
Well,
Good or
if
bad?
you're talking about the marine environment,
Mostly, but and coastal.
well, I think it will certainly impact on man, because man is really, wherever possible, to try to develop their best position along the coast. You know, in terms of, it's become a very valuable, highly sought after residential asset. So I think man has probably ventured a little bit too far in terms of nature's boundaries, and I think that is just a bit of an oversight, because the environment is constantly going through change, and you know, the earth has its cycles, and the cycles have existed forever. In a place like False Bay, for quite a bit of its existence, it was actually dry land. It's not a very deep bay, and at some part of it was a dunescape. So every 30 to 40,000 years, we've had this process of sea level rise and fall. It's a dynamic process. Our kind of history is quite limited in terms of time scale, as opposed to what the Earth's time scale is. But for me personally, I think it's more man's impact on
It's a little bit different now
really
because-
physical things, tangible things, and it has been.
Has it?
Yeah.
Completely icebound, like a snowball.
Not completely locked up, and that's why the Cape is rather different from other areas, and that's why we have such a diverse vegetation type, because some parts of the world are relatively ice-free, even during that great chill. There are two schools. You obviously got the scientists that have their, you know, we live in a society where everything is about finding a mechanism of survival, and even scientists have to find a mechanism of survival. And if they can come up with a good theory to support their situation as a scientist, then they're sustaining themselves. And if that theory is to promote the idea that we're going through a time of stress, that global warming is a major impact, then it does create a bit of a public hype, and it does get people on board to help them support their research, because it becomes then a sustainable opportunity for that scientist. And there are two schools. Somebody might have a different theory, and whoever puts the right theory together, because there are many explanations for these environmental effects. One can actually put it down to much more than just pure global warming. And it also depends on, like, you know, how people are lobbied, and how the political support kind of rallies around certain issues, and the way that they can get people on board to achieve their end. You know, there's a great amount of support for anything where one raises a level of fear amongst people. When their security is compromised, if their well-being is stressed, they will always find mechanisms to try and discount their stress situation on something, which is most often bigger issues like environment. And I think the environmental issues that they put out there and the doom and gloom that they present are sometimes a bit of a smokescreen for other things that are going down.
And yet, previous civilizations have become extinct, we've basically gone down.
Well, I think a lot of that is human dynamics. Those extinctions would probably be effective of maybe a localized environmental factor, an extended drought or a local flood, and I mean those situations have existed in the past. It's not that the world hasn't had catastrophic environmental conditions. I mean, they have happened. We do have volcanoes erupting, having a huge effect on a much greater area than just the local one. I think it's more how man influences his local environment and how they can try and keep a status quo of balancing nature and balancing human needs.
Project would work, where they would come and negotiate because they'd have an agenda. They want to come in here and they want to start a AIDS orphanage or something like that. They would go to the chief and they'd say to the chief, we want to start up an AIDS orphanage and we want to try and employ some people and educate some people and we want to take care of all your AIDS orphans and for that we want some land. And the chief would think about it seriously and he would feel important and say, yes, it's a good idea, we need these things. And there would be this trade-off, but in a way the project would then be beheld to the chief, whereas we kind of came through the back door here. Firstly, because I came in here with a preconceived idea that this whole tribal system or traditional system was flawed anyway, and it failed. So I came in here with kind of really a judgment against this whole traditional system and things like that. You know, from what I'd heard, which is really unfair, but that's how I came in here. I sort of touched a little bit on what Contra Lesser, which is the Concrete Traditional Leaders, was all about, and it looked dodgy. In a sense, it was quite rude. I should have gone to the great place of this specific council and said, I'm here to do this. The other thing was, having worked in the Transkei before, worked in many other countries in Africa as well, is that you sort of also believe in the bush telegraph. And I sort of thought, well, what I'm doing, if it's important enough, then somebody will hear about it and they'll come and find me and say, let's meet, sort of thing, which didn't happen. So either the bush telephone didn't get there, or I just haven't been doing enough important stuff really at that level. So what that did for the project anyway was, I think, was quite beneficial in that journey of understanding what these problems are all about, because we didn't have to work to anybody's agenda or had to deliver anything to anybody. While I was busy, not sure what I was really doing, just building this island in the middle of this place that I wasn't familiar with, having never been as close to the coast. I'd worked up in Ngcobo and places like that several years before. To put in a relatively self-sustainable place and hoping that people would just be flocked and would just feel there's some kind of magnetic pull to this place, and we could teach people how to eat and to respect water and soil and building and things like that, and get their houses stronger, which was really naive of me, I think, in hindsight. I think people are used to being herded in a way, and they just didn't. So they thought, in order to engage with me, they'd have to pay me. In other words, if they want to come and make bricks, they'd have to pay me to do that, which was never in my mind, but I didn't articulate that very well, I think. So all this time I'm busy developing these gardens, I'm busy building these buildings, and sorting out these water issues and things like that. And at the same time, I'm watching it collapse around me on the greater scale. The municipality falling to pieces, the water systems falling to pieces, understanding how that's affected the whole dynamics of the community. because I'm living inside this place and I'm seeing. And I've done this before in other places in other parts of Africa, but never with such a social dysfunctionality, which is what we've got here. So watching people's buildings fall down, and not jumping in these things and trying to save everybody, but just saying, well, tough. You know, you don't, until you decide to integrate, it's what's going to happen. Of course, because what then, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, but this main chief who was head of Controlesa, who I was working with, died, and left this huge void suddenly that we had started, which was about leadership. And he completely saw things the way that I saw things, of understanding that present leadership was flawed, and had to be nurtured, and then to start focusing on the next leadership, the children, and to create leadership schools for these guys to come through so we can start to shift the whole thing around. Everything is based on oil.
Yeah.
Our monetary system, our judicial system, our education systems, everything on this table. Well, this is now second generation, so that's now no longer oil required. But that's our existence. Oil comes crash. I mean, we see it. I mean, yesterday, I mean, the Dow Jones fell another 3.5% yesterday. You know, you look across the board in the American markets, it's just red. They just crashed. Oil organizations went down 4 to 5%. They're just coming crashing down, and it's happening every day. They're totally overinflated because they're based on where they think the oil reserves are, not where the oil, because everybody's overselling their oil. They're saying, oh no, we've got loads of it still, because they don't want to create panic. We're into these long wars now. I mean, when you've got a country like America that's a net importer of oil, I mean, they produce, I think, about 2 to 3, not even 2% probably anymore, of the world's oil. But they use 25% of the world's oil. I mean, they have to control the world. The economy is based on it. They have to control the world's oil, which means they have to be in war. So that's what's going to go on. I mean, it's not going to stop. The only thing that's going to stop it, when there's no more oil to put in the ship, the HSS Indomitable or whatever it's called, to get it across the ocean anymore, that's when it's all going to come grinding to a halt. So we go back to this governance you're talking about. It's all based on central control. But what happens when that central control is broken? The most recent example of that happening was when Katrina went into New Orleans. And it cut off, in a first world country, okay, it cut off Washington, D.C. And within hours, people turned on people. Shops were pillaged. Next thing, people just turned on people. Okay, and that's what happens when there's chaos, when there's no more control, there's no one. So now, in a third world or developing country, when suddenly that power line is cut, it's going to be mayhem. Unless we can shift it, and we can get people and communities, let's call them transition, whatever we want to call them, all these words have been banning around, where they're taking care of themselves. Where they're not reliant upon the central system of control, which is money. And so there's something that's gone. You see, in our conditioning, and we are so conditioned, we have become codependent, where we depend upon each other. And this is really it's a disease. If we use which I do often, I use an analogy of a forest. And we see these forests where they're codependent, where the trees cross over each other and they stop the flow of air through each other, and they stop the growth. And we've seen it here. There's so much evasive stuff comes in. But if you look at a forest that each tree stands strong on its own, and then as a collective, it's incredibly strong. It's a strong, healthy environment. And it's a three-dimensional living thing then. And if we can create that where people can stand strong on their own as individuals, and then as a community, they're really, really strong. And they do things out of free will. Then we can shift the consciousness. But that goes against the religious beliefs, because that's all about codependency. I mean, goodness, it's so disempowering. It's there's this fellow who died for my sins. For goodness sakes, I'll die for my own sins. It's very disempowering, and that's where it starts. And it's been so successful. It's indoctrinated in this. I mean, in these areas that I am in. I mean, this religion that's used here now, several versions of Christianity that are all over these areas that I'm in here. Unbelievable, the fear and the obsession with death and the amount of resources that get put into death and this dignity in death. But where's the dignity in life? And that's what we need to be focusing on. Is that every moment that we have this gift of living, and let's make it count. Let's be authentic. But we all put our belief in old mutual and funeral schemes for our death, so we can be remembered. But these guys who have these, they throw these huge parties. They spent their life beating their wives, abusing their children. But they had this incredible funeral, man. It was huge. You should have seen it. Strong Muti there. No. Disgraceful. Let's put that dignity into life now. And I really do believe that in this religion that existed before we came along with this whole sort of Christianity trip and things like that, was this incredible dynamic relationship between the earth and the people in Africa. You know, they call it Kwamata or something like that, and it's brilliant. It's so naive. It's brilliant because it's got counterbalance. It's just based in love and respect. And you know, if you respect the sun for rising, for setting, you respect the seasons. You show respect to the animal you kill to nurture yourself. You respect your spouse or your kids, or you know. Suddenly, here come these guys and saying, "Oh, hold on, you know, you guys are savages unless you bow down to this figure here. That's it. You're going to go and die a miserable death in hell and things like it." And this, how could people come here with anything but love anyway? Because that's all we believe in is love. Okay, so this is how people are building here, people without much means, which is called a wattle and daub. So here you've got your wattle, which is your wooden framework, and then they're packing in the daub, which is the clay, in here. Now, historically, this is a brilliant way to build. I mean, a lot of your Tudor houses in the United Kingdom, which have quite adverse weather, use this system. Okay, and they've lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. This house won't last a year. Okay, and they have to redo it. What I'd like to propose that the way that this has been mixed, the way it's been mixed in, there's not much intention going into this. It shows a victim mentality within the people, because if this clay was worked through properly, in other words, it was kneaded like you knead bread, and they put a bit of some dry grass in it, or some millie husks and things like that into it, it would create a stronger integrity in the bond, and it would last for years and years and years. But this has really just been put together very loosely, and it's not much. This has got to set for about 3 weeks. This digester, which I designed, it's a closed bag. Well, it's got an inlet and an outlet and a gas outlet. So it's made from reinforced PVC, which is the same material as you'll make a jumping castle from. And it's shaped. The shape of it is like a loaf of bread. It's risen. So it has the convex top on it, and everything else is squared. It fits into this frame here that I just built with brick. And how it works is that